show. Okay, yeah, I'm okay for being recorded. Through time, I've been working around studying the long-term dynamics of these species, which has a huge socio-economic importance and, of course, ecological importance through the entire Amazon basin. So these are different landscapes dominated by Mauritia, and one particular thing that is very, very good for people interested in peats is that Mauritia grows in waterlogged soils, so saturated in water, so they easily form peat material or swamps. Okay, so you have here different pictures of places where I've been. In this picture in particular, this is the Apure River. The Mauritia are here. These are Mauritiella, which is like a sister species, but not exactly the same ecologically. And why is also important Mauritia? First of all, from a paleoecological point of view, is very, very abundant through the entire basin in elevations lower than 1,000 meters of elevation, and is heavily used by a wider range of different indigenous cultures nowadays and in the past. So if we are studying dynamics of Mauritia, it might be that we find some human occupancy also in those places, at least in some regions and in some periods of time. So I would like to show you 3 examples of my research done in peatlands in the tropics. So the first one is from this mid-elevation place, is a peatland dominated by Rockinia, but one Bromeliaceae species, and then we go to the coastland lowlands in the Delta of the Orinoco, and finally an example of the Jasony National Park in Ecuadorian Amazonia. So this particular place is quite interesting. The Gran Sabana is an area that lies, is the Venezuelan side of the Roraima savannas, just between the Orinoco and the Amazon forests. There's a mid-elevation place, and it's characterized by these treeless savannas with some patches of forest along the rivers, monospecific communities dominated by Mauritia flexuosa, and is known by everyone because of the tepuis or because of these solar mountains. I'm taking one example from this picture that I was showing at the beginning, the Bauchi. I'm not going into the detail of the pollen records, don't worry, if you're a palynologist, I'm not going to go with this disaster. But what I want to show in here is that this location nowadays is a treeless savanna, but during the mid-Holocene, this is the last 8,000 years, it was covered by a rainforest that increases or decreases depending on different things. We can see by analyzing other things besides pollen, we have charcoal record in here, and we have some algae and aquatic plant remains that can give us some information about the moisture availability of the soils. So we can infer some climatic dynamics with the pollen and the aquatic related morphotypes, but also fire dynamics through time with the charcoal record. And what we see in this summary is, as you can see, there was a bigger extension of a forest. It was up to 3,000 years, a bit less than 3,000 years ago, it was dominated by Brent forest that was replaced at some point by a secondary forest, and then finally the establishment of the savanna is 1,500 years ago. And what we're seeing here is that this during this moment of secondary forest, which I think that is the typo in here, I'm so sorry. This was the driest interval according to the aquatic records, but there was the lowest incidence of fires. And in the savannas, and the other way around, it was the establishment of the savanna was produced during the wettest interval for the last 8,000 years, but it has the highest incidence of fire. And then we started to think why we have wet conditions and a huge increase of fires. This is called Aconuco. In other places, it's called chakras. These are very small /1 hotspots for indigenous practice. So what we saw is that this current location it belongs to the territory nowadays of the Pemon. The Pemon is a culture in Venezuela that is from open landscapes, and they are very close to the use of fire. They are super related to use fire for more than 50 different cultural reasons, not just to burn the soils, but for communication, magics, whatever. But this location is very, very close to the current location of the Yanomami, which is a forested indigenous culture. So what we interpreted in this record is that up to 2,700 years ago, the landscape was used by probably a forested like indigenous culture. It could be Yanomami, but we have no proof whatsoever which culture it could be, but it was living within the forest. Then there was some sort of land abandonment. That's why, maybe because the climate changed, maybe because the forest changed, we don't know, but there was no fire. And then 1,500 years ago, the Pemon culture arrived to this period and started managing the landscape as they do it nowadays. The second example is from the delta of the Orinoco. So in this particular place is the homeland of the Warao culture. They are called the people of the boat or the water people, because as you can see, well, there is not a lot of terra firme. Everything is covered in swamps, mostly with the presence of Mauritia. So in this record, I'm not showing the pollen record, but you can see that these are the samples of the pollen record, and they are very, very well distributed and classified in 3 different ecosystems or 4 vegetation communities. So we have in the bottom something that is called, it could be related to some coastal vegetation with the mango and everything. Then we have swamp forest or a mixed forest with components of different types. And 3,000 years, well, a bit earlier than 3,000 years ago, we have the establishment of the current landscape, which is Amarita-dominated palm forest. We start looking into the climatic reconstruction at that time. The location, the core record was extracted in here and is very close to the Cariaco record. So we could compare our vegetation trends with the climatic record of Cariaco. So we could see that within that particular time, we have the strong El Niño event and we have the replacement of the coastal area, of the coastal vegetation to a more inland vegetation. But if you look into more detail, the location is, well, the core record was collected from a place that is 50 kilometers away from the coast. So it shouldn't have this coastal material or this coastal vegetation at all. So what we saw looking into some geomorphological works is that up to 3,000 years ago, there was 30 kilometers less of sediment. So the swamp, this pit is growing so fast, like really, really fast. And 5,000, 6,000 years ago, the coastline was much closer to this location. Therefore, we have a more coastal vegetation. So it was a migration of the swamp, of the coastline. Let's focus on the charcoal record. The charcoal record is very interesting because this is macro charcoal. This is counted separately, not from the palynological slides. So we can see that the highest by far record is at the very bottom of the sequence, a long, long time ago. So what we could infer is that if you, what we suggested was that because of these coastal resources, there might be some indigenous settlements living there and taking profit of the coastal resources. This is supportable. That was inferred because we have archaeological evidences in many, many different places along the coast, but not in the Orinoco, because the current coastal area didn't exist. It was much inland than it is nowadays. So we suggested that it might be this charcoal and the product of some indigenous settlements living there at that time. We go to the mid and late Holocene and we see that the fine record is not, we see this change in the vegetation, which is kind of dramatic, but there is not a very strong fire regime. We can see that the ENSA variability was increased in that period. So we suggested that these fires in the peatland might be of climatic origin at that time. And then, but also we can never rule out the presence of human population, because in that particular time, there was a huge migration period from different cultures arriving to the coastline. There was a big settlement in here, and they were taking new routes. We have the Caribs also coming into here. So, you know, you can never rule out, but at least we know that the climate was kind of unstable at that time. So let's go to the last millennium, the last 1,000 years, and we see again that there is an increase in the charcoal record again, but we also have the Little Ice Age with a dry interval, so we infer that those fires could be of a mixed origin. How I'm going on time? I don't know if I rule out my time. The evidence. Tell me, Angela. Sorry, I couldn't. So sorry.
You can just continue. We have time.
Okay, thank you. So although we have the Little Ice Age, we also have archaeological evidence pointing out that at that particular time, we already have settlements living there, not in our location of the study, but in the proper delta. So, you know, it could be a little bit of both. Every time that I click here. Okay, so finally, very shortly and very quick, the National Park of Yasuni in the Amazon part of Ecuador. This is one of the wettest points of the entire Amazon basin. So temperature is quite stable, but we have like very weak dry seasons from time to time. So it's kind of important place because it hasn't been that studied, although there are some preliminary works. But there is, well, some kind of, it was even called one of the Nabio refugee for the refugee hypothesis. So there has been quite a few works done in the late 90s about in this particular place, but the conclusions were, well, the hypotheses were not conclusive because they didn't use charcoal sometimes. They knew that there were some archaeological remains, but they find no evidence of humans, or the other way around. They suggested that there were some humans, but they don't have any other support. So we came back to this place and we collect a core just besides this Maxis 5 core. Again, not explaining, but you can see that the vegetation is quite dynamic. We have Cecropia here, and then we have the establishment of Mauritia, which is replaced by Didertea, another palm, and again, Mauritia is coming. So we have quite a lot of different changes, but one change that particularly caught my attention is the one that is produced at the very bottom, this replacement from Cecropia and the establishment of Mauritia. This change occurred at the same time that we have a massive peak in the charcoal record. Let me come back again that this is one of the wettest places in the Amazon basin. So such a high emphasis of local fires, these are regional fires that could come from anywhere, but local fires was kind of intriguing. So at the same time, what I saw is a cucurbitacea pollen grain. That cucurbitacea is, I've talked about this with Jose Iriarte, which I think is there, that with phytoliths is like super common to find, but with pollen, it is not. So the presence of cucurbitacea pollen grains might indicate that there might be people around that place 5,000 years ago. So to conclude, peatlands are very varied in nature and can be very abundant in the tropics, but there is a very general absence of paleoecological works carried out in peatlands compared to other sedimentary archives. This is changing, but still there is a lot of work that needs to be done. So far, fire on peatlands has been found to be mostly human-made or anthropogenic-made in these kind of peatland ecosystems. There is a lack of synchronicity with climatic changes, but there might be an agreement and synchronicity of human migrations through time. Fight trends, though, so to sum up, based on at least my research, I would suggest that in peatland ecosystem from North and South America, fight trends through time are going to be, at least so far, closely linked to the anthropogenic history of these two sites. So we need more overlap with archaeology and other disciplines. So that's all for me. Thanks so much. And I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you.